Welcome back, everyone, to episode 117 of the RUDIS Wrestling Podcast. And today, I got a great new host, great new guest. We've got the voice of wrestling, the voice of the Olympics, World Championships, NCAAs, NAIA. Wherever you go around the world, this is the man you're going to hear covering the event. He's a National Hall of Fame inductee. He's an 11-time national award-winning journalist. We have Jason Bryant. Without further ado, we have Jason Bryant. Jason, thanks for jumping on the show. Excited about this. We've got a relationship that goes back quite a ways at this point.
Yeah, you've told me some interesting things about when you watch Penn State, Ohio State football games and your watching tips on how you do that with and keeping that on the low key. I always remember that story. Of course, between me and your brother, we've known each other in the coaching ranks for a while and having dealt with rankings and such. But for those of you tuning in to see curly afros, I'm sorry. I'm 40. I'm starting to lose it. You're not going to get curly locks that you're used to here on the RUDIS podcast. But I'm excited about this. We got a lot of stuff to talk about. I'm actually really excited because with all the podcasts and things that I've done over the years, one of the things that I've not done is had a show where I'm really spitting my opinion out, unless I'm a guest now, and that's going to change here a little bit. You're going to get a little bit of insight from where I'm sat. I've worked for the National Wrestling Coaches Association, USA Wrestling, Amateur Wrestling News. I announced for United World Wrestling. So I've joked that I've had more jobs in wrestling than Sammy Henson. So we'll go with that theme for a while.
And I think that's what's exciting about having you on the show is I think one, obviously, when people are tuning in to listen to the podcast, and I think the niche we've created is number one, we want to talk about current events, but bringing someone with your depth of knowledge. And, I think at this point, JB, you're one of the most knowledgeable, insightful, have one of the best historical minds, not only historical minds, but your mind centered on the current and emerging events in the sport. I think that's so compelling that, your level of insight and your depth of knowledge goes beyond just the box score. I mean, it extends beyond that, the experiences you've had. So hopefully, and in addition to the experience I've had in my coaching career, I think it creates a pretty interesting mix about, what our insights are going to be, what our thoughts, the levels of discussion that we can have. So hopefully it's, what we're trying to talk about here today and moving forward digs even deeper behind just the surface level of what was going behind the match. What influences had on the outcome of the match and just different emerging legislation. I know you're on the cutting edge of that. You're constantly in tune with what's going on at the NCAA level, the UWW level, NWCA, women's wrestling. The emerging status of women's wrestling at the collegiate level. All these things I think are just going to be fascinating discussion points, and I'm looking forward to jumping in and picking your brain and getting your insights.
Yeah, if you're looking for me for technical analysis, Matt's been the Division I coach. You're going to go that way. What I like to tell people is there's a lot of things that I see from an intangible standpoint. It's something maybe as simple as like when I did high school rankings, and I'll be at the Ironman or something, and I'll look and be like, well, what happened to him? And then hear that the kid is distraught because his first girlfriend broke up with him, and that those are real life things like at the high school wrestling level that when you don't take into account because wins and losses are rankings, but those are things that are in the back of your mind that the next time like so and so is going to wrestle him, they're going to be in a different situation. Or, was the travel, was there a problem? There's so many intangibles in wrestling that we just look at and be like, well, wins and losses. So those are things that I've always kind of paid attention to. And that was just one example. But those are the things that I feel like, sometimes get overlooked in the discussions because we're human beings. There are so many factors outside of the sport of wrestling that impact the competition on the mat. So those are the things that, again, I pay attention to. And I'm always that always piques my curiosity.
Yeah, and I think that right there just touches on a point that we've discussed. Ben and I've discussed, Max and I've discussed. I think you probably discussed at a certain point is the ducking issue, and how that's affecting duels. And I think the general narrative out there is coaches. When you see a kid not wrestling on a weekend, coaches are trying to protect the ranking, protect the seed, protect whatever the scenario would be. It's a form of protection, and wanted to pick your brain, get your thoughts on that, because, to your point, I think there's a lot of layers out this. We are dealing with, if we're specifically talking about college kids, 18 to 22-year-old kids going to class all day, working out 3 times a day, stressing their body, getting it down to weight, injury, sickness, all these things. So, there's probably a lot more to the discussion outside of, I just don't want to, I don't want to go up against this guy this weekend, or I don't want to put my ranking on the line or my potential seed on the line. What's your perspective about that general topic of ducking in the sport of wrestling right now?
I think it's a little overstated, but I honestly believe it does happen. There are people who are thinking, if you're in the Big Ten, to me, I think it's less ducking than it is protecting your body, because you're going to go through the Big Ten schedule. You're going to go through then a Big Ten tournament, which basically, if you're seed protecting, then you go through the Big Ten tournament. What's the point? That's the tournament you need to perform in to get the seed, because we've seen guys with almost double-digit losses perform well at the Big Ten tournament and get a high seed at nationals, meaning it's like, okay, well, what will we be wrestling for? Vice versa. So it depends on the conference, I think. If you're from a smaller conference and you need to get that opponent to help with your RPI, to help with your win percentage, or get a quality win in terms of the seeding goes, that's where I think it can get frustrating from the opponent's perspective. It's like, I want to wrestle that guy. This is the only chance I get on my schedule. Say I had a bad Vegas, or I had a bad scuffle, or I was sick and couldn't compete. You get a limited number of opportunities to compete against those hammers, especially from a small school. So that's the other side of the coin, is it's not necessarily protecting the wrestler. Well, what's the detraction on the other side? Yeah, you're going to see in the Big Ten, Mason, Paris, Gable, Steveson. We're going to talk about that here a little bit more in length later, but they're going to probably see each other. They're going to have the opportunity to see each other in the Big Ten championships. Whereas another match we're going to talk about here later with Lou Dupre and Hunter Boland, they're not in the same conference. Lou Dupre has had a really good schedule. Those type of things. What's that going to affect Hunter Boland, who hasn't had that hammer schedule? He's going to have Trent Hidley in the ACCs, but what's the long-term effects of that during the season for the opponent's perspective? That's something I also want to look at. But again, to the original point of, do I see him as a duck? Yeah, sometimes there are guys that are like, if he's got a hurt knee, something happens, he's coming off the flu, it's his first match back. These are things that, firsthand as a coach, you have to take your athlete's well-being, and keep that in mind first and foremost. It's, as painful as it is to say sometimes, the athlete is the focal point. So, the 100, 200 to maybe 10,000 fans that show up, yeah, that's great to promote the sport, but sometimes you have to make a hard decision. Problem is we're getting a lot of those hard decisions becoming more and more frequent, and it becomes this narrative of ducking. So, if it happens once, it's an anomaly. If it happens twice, okay. If it keeps happening, then it becomes a pattern. So, again, each program is different. Each program has different resources. Each program has different, athletic training and that type of stuff. So, let's be honest. Probably from experience that the athletic training facilities at Penn State are vastly different than what they are at Binghamton. So, not everything is the same in college wrestling.
Yeah, that was a perfect in-depth layered discussion. Exactly what we were talking about. Like, it's not just as simple as like, I don't want my guy wrestling this weekend. And to your point, that was one of the biggest things, and one of the biggest shifts in priorities when I went from Penn State to, say, Clarendon and Binghamton's. Like, you have quality opponents in spades. Like, I know, like, throughout my schedule from competition, number 1 to 17, I'm going to get plenty of RPI opportunities. I'm going to wrestle the best. It's guaranteed. I am wrestling the best guys in the country. But for a place like Binghamton, it's like, okay, where do I balance? Like, I've got to find that fine balance between trying to have a successful program, but giving my guys the best opportunity to see the best ranked opponents, to position them forward, to the EIWA, to NCAAs. And it's a delicate balance. And, for me, it was a lot more disappointing when one of my guys at Binghamton didn't get to wrestle a ranked guy from, say, Penn State, Iowa, Okie State for some reason, as opposed to when I was at Penn State, I always knew that next opportunity was going to be there. And so if I lost out on an opportunity, or one of my guys lost out on an opportunity, I knew I would get to see that opponent at a future date. But, those were limited opportunities. That's why, like, I think at Binghamton's, like, it was priority, like, okay, what's the best strength of schedule as far as an in-season tournament that I can go to where, you have that balance where you can get success on a tournament level, but you can also be challenged. But on the flip side of that, like in the Big Ten, when you literally might have to see a guy 5 or 6 times, like at what point is like, how many times is too much to see this guy? Like knowing, okay, I could see him at Vegas. I see him in the regular season. I see him at the Big Ten tournament. I see him at the NCAA tournament. How many times is too many times to see this guy?
Well, I think that's a question as a coach that you look at and be like, you have to weigh that decision. I know that when I talk to Matt Storniolo and when we're doing the Midlands things, we looking at some of the draws and be like, the things that we try to do with the coaches, this isn't just for Northwestern. It's like, okay, when they're seeded, they are where they are. A 7 and a 10 if they're in the same conference, to be fair. But sometimes when you randomize those athletes, you like to mix it up. And so you're not going to have Big Ten guy, Big Ten guy just to get to that 7-10 match. So in those cases, you try to make those events, avoided. So if a VMI is coming into the scuffle, they're not going to want to wrestle Davidson and Chattanooga right off the bat. I can't really speak for how the scuffle does things, but that is an example. Now, in terms of the seeding, when you have that many head-to-head wins, what plays precedence? And that's one thing that, having been from a small conference where I went to school when Old Dominion was in the CAA, when Gray Simons was the coach there, you'd sit there and be like, okay, what plays more role in the seed? So this is where the ducking or the avoidance of a matchup can play a role, because in the old system, there was actually almost a benefit to ducking depending on how your conference had set up the seeding. What drove me nuts about the CAA is oftentimes, at that time, Ryder, Drexel, and Hofstra had come in from the ECWA, and they merged with the CAA around 2000, 2001. And oftentimes those better schools were not wrestling the better athletes from the lower tier schools. So your Campbell at the time was in the conference. Old Dominion, George Mason, James Madison had a team. They were pretty good at the time. And you're not seeing those type of matchups because to get to the show, you had to make the finals in the CAA. So rather than go through 2 tough opponents to get in, the better guys are 1-2. They know they're going to make it. And it was a lot harder for some of the smaller schools to kind of crack that nut with the old qualification system based on historical data. Thankfully, that's gone. That's been a byproduct of why this new system is great, is because you know what? You're in the smaller conference, especially, you're going to see more of those better kids hit because they need those points just as well as the quality wins as the other guy does. So thankfully, that's been a byproduct of it. But again, how many times is it to hit the right guy? Again, I don't know the answer to that question, but sometimes even as a fan, as I watch the sports, man, they've wrestled how many times? Why is it it's a 4-5? Couldn't that have been a 3-6? So sometimes you look at that and be like, you want to see diversity, because that is the benefit of the system. Is now these bigger schools will typically they won't wrestle a dynamic schedule beyond their conference schedule. Missouri has been having a hard time scheduling duels over the years because they're so good. Nobody wants to wrestle them and lose a duel. Cornell in the same respect, but the power schools are going to get their matchups. I really don't know the answer on how many is too many. I guess, again, I'm going to defer to you as a coach, but it's hard to beat a guy 3 times in a year.
Yeah, and I think there's another level of this too, JB. It's like maybe this has always been going on some level. I think it has. I think, behind the scenes, as you're talking with your coaching staff after every weekend, revisiting, the good, the bad, the improvements, of what needs to go on during the week as you're starting to refocus on the next week's competition. I think there's a certain level of this that's always gone on, but I think the level of information that fans have at their disposal now, like they have the coaches poll out there. You can see where, what the coaches poll looks like. You can see what the RPI looks like. You see all these things, that you traditionally or historically you wouldn't have available to you. We have much better resources, much more information accessible to fans, so they kind of get a bird's eye view into the thought process of maybe what this coach is thinking, as opposed to maybe even a decade ago, we didn't have all this information, to influence and help form the fans' opinion. And we're all collaborating on social media, on forums, on different things to have an informed discussion on these things from a fan perspective. But I think on a certain level, this has probably been going on. Strategic decisions have always been going on. I don't think, by and large, I think there are some coaches that will tend to game the system if they can. That's kind of how they're wired. I think most coaches are like, anywhere, anytime, we'll put it on the line. I think most likely, I think that's the appealing aspect of the sport. When we look at the sport of wrestling, we'll put it on the line no matter what, anytime, any place, any arena, we'll show up and put it on. I think as, the safety of our athletes, becomes more relevant in the discussion, head trauma, weight loss, all those things, recovery, how you train and periodize your training to get you peaked out. There's so many factors that go into this decision that, on the surface, it's not just beyond like, should this guy wrestle or should this guy not? There's depth of this, but I think it's been going on for a long period of time. We just have more insight from a fan perspective in this day and age. I don't know if there's any thought to that.
Well, yeah, we've got resources, so we're more in tune with it. I think the days are gone where you show up at nationals and not know who somebody is. I mean, my first nationals at the Division I level was 2002. I mean, we had the internet then. Intermat was a thing. I was doing my Virginia site. I mean, we had the wrestling mall, and we were an internet-driven sport back then. And even then, sometimes you'd be like, who's this? Who is Lance Nixon from Campbell? Who is Matt Irwin from VMI? Who are these, these small conference guys? Wait, Princeton has a good guy. Who's this Parker guy? These are examples from that year in Albany that I remember. And if you're from a smaller conference, you're clued into those guys because that's kind of where you're at, where you're insulated in that little bubble. And everybody knows the Big Ten guys because that was what was in Win magazine, that was in Amateur Wrestling News, that was on the front page of Intermat, the mat.com before USA Wrestling bought it. So the information from a fan standpoint is there. Where I think the key now is look at the number of matches that are being wrestled these days. I remember looking at John Smith's record at one time. At one point, I think he was like 41, 42-0 or 41-1, 48-1. There was something, he had almost 50 matches. It is almost unheard of these days for an elite athlete at the Division I level to get more than 40 matches in a season going into the postseason. We talk about, at the high school level, it's opposite. They want match time. At the college level, I think our information has improved to the point where, again, athletic training, the mindset part of it is like you want to go into the season, the postseason, as healthy as possible, because I can't remember who told me a couple years ago, but everybody's hurt at nationals. Every single one of those 330 athletes at the Division I championships is hurt. Almost every single one of those athletes at Division II, Division III, and AI have gone through a ding through the season. So to go through a season without a single injury, I was talking to Link Davis. He's a Division II coach at Emmanuel College. They came up to the Virginia Duels. Between their men's and women's team this year, they've had 16 wrestlers, either a shoulder, a concussion, a knee. I mean, it's sometimes you have those types of years. And I think the information that's there about injuries is why coaches are also setting these things out a little bit more. If you've got, he tweaked his knee. Well, do you want to make that worse? The information, gone are the days, I think, of any place, any time. It's a good soundbite. But at the same point, the realistic part is here, again, back to what I said at the beginning, it's protecting your athlete. Do you want to put your athlete at risk in January, knowing that their goal is March? What's the harm in setting out, this is, I guess, the counterpoint to setting out 2 duels so you can actually, you can rehab it, your trainers say you're good. All right, now you're 100% going back out there versus 75%. What would you rather be going into the tournament third weekend in March, Matt? Would you rather be 95% or 65%? 95% with a 15-1 record or 65 with a 14-6 record?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about it all the time. As soon as the season starts, once official practice starts, you're never 100% again. So what do you do? What are the things and what are the safeguards you're going to put in place on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis to try and keep your guys as close to that 100% threshold as they possibly can be without knowing that they can reasonably expect to be there for over a 4-month point of time. And that's why you have as many meetings as you're meeting with your staff, you're meeting with your athletic trainers, you're getting, protocols on rehab plans, and you're, looking at head trauma and different things. And, the day and age of athletes making the decision to go out and compete is gone. The day and age of coaches having 100% authority to say my athlete's good and I can send him out there is gone. There's a lot more collaboration from athletic departments. When we could talk about head trauma. Number one, like there's a protocol that you have to go through. If you get dinged and you enter the concussion protocol, minimum out for a week, just with a ding, just with an assessment that you can't pass concussion protocol, you're off the mat for a week. And then once you get cleared, then you have to follow a series of tests and pass a series of tests to pass to go out and compete again. So I think coaches are much more inclined to rely on the expertise of their training staff as opposed to the old school wrestling mentality. Suck it up, spit on it, rub it, put some tape on it, go out there and show how tough you are. Toughness, I think, for decades, we hung our hat on toughness being the most important thing in the sport. And it's not. It's about the health, safety, and well-being of the athletes, number one. But number two is making sure that they are ready to compete at the most optimal times. So we kind of went down a rabbit hole to start the show, which seems to fall in line with a lot of the things Ben and I did. But I think that's the fun part of the show is like getting into layers of discussion that don't just talk about the surface. Go, dig a little bit more.
One thing about too with the discussion, and again, I'm gonna circle back and name drop Matt Storniolo here. It was a couple years ago. He had an athlete that was out, and we're like, why is he out? Why is he out? Why is he out? Well, Northwestern's concussion protocol is a little more stringent. Their athletic training policy, it's maybe not written in stone, but it's like this is also something you have to understand that each school with their resources, they also have different things. How much does a football player's concussion or their head injury impact how the athletic training staff or medical staff treats another athlete? So it could be a precedent set that there was something really bad. So we're going to take an extra precaution so this doesn't happen. So again, not every single school is playing with the same cards. I mean, you might have a situation where it's okay, there's no football at this school. They haven't dealt with a serious head injury except for wrestling. Whereas if you're at a football school, for example, you're probably seeing concussions a lot more. That athletic training staff is a little bit more in depth with, okay, we can do this, this, and this. Now, granted, this isn't a shot at these trainers that don't have their certain medical licenses. They're all qualified, certified athletic trainers, but it's like the level of experience on the job training, you can see things a little differently when we've gone through it more. So, and sometimes I don't think anybody is going to err on the side of caution and be mad with that. It might be frustrating from a fan. Well, guess what? Again, we get back to the athlete's safety. So again, it also depends on the school you're at and their policies on head injuries or knee injuries or things of that nature. And, we've seen it that some schools hold guys out for a little bit longer to make sure the athlete is 100%. And, again, as frustrating as that is, as it can impact a dual meet, especially in a scheduled big match, it's kind of where we're at right now with concussions are a serious thing. You can't really screw with them.
Yeah. Yeah. So I thought that was a fun way to start the show. You rated.
Yeah, are we going to get to point one at all here? Because
point one, we've got
a
Google Doc. So I guess it seemed to me there's a lot of great individual matchups. There was a lot of good duels this weekend, JB, but it didn't seem like we've seen a lot of upsets throughout the year in duels. We didn't really see that this weekend. So I think this weekend is a good opportunity to maybe go into individuals and teams. And I think, the team that everyone's been talking about for, since the start of the season is Iowa. And they continued to make a statement this weekend, defeating, number 7, Nebraska 26-6. They just, on the surface right now, they seem like they are the team. They are the team to beat. And the decisions that Tom Brands and the rest of his coaching staff is making to bolster their team, to stabilize any uncertainty there, he seems to be, making those decisions. I thought it was, again, a really impressive performance by Iowa this weekend. It doesn't get any more dominant than that. I mean, it pretty much held serve throughout the duel. The results in and of itself. I don't know if you had any general thoughts of the duel after seeing the results or any specific things that jumped out to you that you wanted to discuss.
Before we actually get to the actual matches, one things that always stand out to me, it's frustrating that I live just far enough away from Carver-Hawkeye that it's a bit of a haul to make an up and back. So it really pains me that I can't get down there as much, because another crowd of 12,000 plus we had blasted out here with a nice little winter storm this weekend. And you had the bandana thing with Sorensen. They were all over the place. Tim Johnson and Jim Gibbons were all over that. That was really cool to see. People are sitting there going, got their Carver cone, which is something, if you've never been to Carver-Hawkeye, by the way, as an aside, this is probably the one place in college wrestling you absolutely, without question, need to attend an Iowa Dual meet, whether you're a Hawkeye fan or not. It's like wrestling's mecca. I wrote a story about it years ago that this is the one place you have to go in wrestling. Rec Hall's great, been there. Gallagher Ibe is great, been there. Grace Hall at Lehigh, one of my favorite places to watch wrestling. But to capture what college wrestling should be at every single venue across the country, you got to go to Carver and really see how just full of fire and just passion that you get. I mean, I remember the loudest I've ever heard a sporting event a couple years ago is when Tony Ramos pinned Jordan Conaway, and the place, I mean, I don't want to say literally exploded, because that means they would have some construction and whatnot, but it was the loudest I've ever heard a sporting event. And I've been going to a lot of sporting events over the years. So as an aside, it was great to see that type of crowd in such terrible weather. The duel I was supposed to announce on Saturday night got moved to Sunday. So that actually enabled me the opportunity to sit on my couch, pop my feet up, pull up the Fox Sports app, because I knew basketball was going to run long. So I saw this coming. I got the app up. I didn't miss Spencer Lee. I was ready for this one. So way too many basketball games prior to Midlands finals. I'm trained for that. But overall, as far as the Hawkeyes go, you kick off with Spencer Lee. Man, I mean, and Abe Assad, I saw him at Midlands and he looked sharp, and now he's got that black and gold on. First home duel gets Taylor Venz, a guy that knows how to win. He's battle tested. He's a Minnesota kid. He's really scrappy. So, it's a good win. And I think that's another thing. People like they're not scratching their head anymore as far as why Tom Brands might have pulled that red shirt. Granted, Cash Wilkie, I believe, has got a win over Venz last season, and Nelson Brands has shown that he's got the capability of beating guys. But you got three good guys right there, and you're going to go with the true freshman who's never been to the show. In a year where they're not as dominant or they're not as favored to win, I think that might be a question mark. But right now, I mean, they're going to just make sure that there's no uncertain terms. They're going to, okay, we're not going to let this one slip through our fingers. So as far as the Hawkeyes go, they wrestle well at home, other than, Warner dropped a match to Eric Schultz, he's had a little bit of an up and down career in terms of, he'll win some matches and then drop some things to wrestlers you're not expecting. But overall, I mean, I think that was probably the B+, A- version of the Hawkeyes right now.
Yeah. I mean, to your point about Carver-Hawkeye Arena, I mean, if you were a pure wrestling fan, I mean, it's truly a bucket list place. I know every time that I got to coach out there was a special thrill, because it's not obviously the environment itself. When you say, it's a special place when you can identify it just by its name. You say Carver-Hawkeye, obviously the Hawkeyes in the title, but if you just say Carver, you know what Carver is.
And you know what getting Carvered means.
Yes.
And that's not meaning you get screwed. That means that they're Carver magic. Getting Carvered, you lose it. Something falls apart and a Hawkeye wins a match they're not supposed to win. It's like, it is a special place to watch wrestling. And again, I'm like I said, I'm not sitting there trying to be a cheerleader for any team. It's just, like I said, I don't care who wins, but I just love seeing that type of atmosphere.
But any fan out there that has some question about, is home court advantage a real thing? Is home mat advantage a real thing? It's real. Go, like you said, go to Carver-Hawkeye Arena. You can feel it. Go to Rec Hall. You can feel it. Go to the Cavelli Center that is recently opened by Ohio State. You can feel it. But I don't think there's any place in the country that has that home mat advantage more so than Carver-Hawkeye. It's funny you touched on, and it's not just the arena, JB. It's the whole town. It's Iowa City. It's the community. You feel it everywhere you go. You feel how passionate this fan base is. I always tell the story, when I was back at Penn State, and I think I was flying to Fargo one year, and I'm in Minneapolis St. Paul Airport. I'm running to get my connection over to Fargo, and I'm going from like terminal A to terminal B. So I'm kind of hustling. I've got my Penn State gear on. And as I'm walking down one of these open corridors, and about 50 yards down the hallway, I see a black and gold, which is pretty common out in the Midwest. I see black and gold. And as I'm walking closer and closer to this person, and we're on either sides of the hallway, this guy locks onto my Penn State gear, makes it a point to stop, make eye contact with me, cross the hallway, and just say, "Go Hawkeyes." And then he turns around and keeps walking. And I thought that was the greatest thing. I got the biggest kick out of it. It was like, I love it. The passion from the Hawkeye Nation. It's everywhere. It's not just contained to the arena or the community. Like anywhere in the country, they're going to make it known how much they love, how much they're loyal to the black and gold. And if you can ever have a time to go out and see Carver-Hawkeye, do it. I mean, you're not going to be disappointed. So I think going back to another point, JB, talking about Assad, and, Ben and I talked about this a little bit. Max and I talked about this. When you're in the position like the Hawkeyes, you haven't won a title for a decade. How all in do you actually go? And I know people were making, they weren't questioning the decision to pull Assad out of redshirt, but I think it was the point. Well, hey, we already have two really good guys here. What do we need? Why do we need to throw Assad in there? But I think how he performed this year, and I get that Wilkie's got a victory over Benz last year, but I think
he's also been in that blood round. So again, you're looking at the difference in points.
Right.
How much difference is R12? I mean, I think it's a 2 or 3 point difference between 7th to 8th and losing in that round, because you get those placement points. But and looking at it right now, it's like where would he fit? Well, Venz was 5 going in on the flow rankings, and Assad comes in at 10, so he's in that round of 12 point placement already. And again, Wilkie was a round of 12 guy. He's been there a couple times. So but is Taylor Venz your litmus test on placement ability? Because again, we talked about Wilkie beating him last year. Well, Venz also beat him at the Big Ten. So where do is that where are we ready to go all in on Assad right now as being ready? Yes, it's a big win. Yes, he was an All-American 2 years ago, but I want to see where does the grind of the Big Ten schedule, because this goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, and in terms of, as a coach, you're getting in there, you're getting matches. Well, when you're in that lineup, you're making 1 hour weigh-ins, and then you're in the Big Ten. And granted, it's the second half of the schedule, but they still got some of the teeth of the schedule to go. So we're going to see how good he is really quickly. I think maybe a little bit premature to go, okay, this was a good decision. I think it was a good decision personally, but I'm curious on how much that Division I grind. He's seeing mat time for the first time. He's a freshman. Nobody cares. It's one of those things that's like, when you're wrestling at Penn, this when your time at Penn State, when you're wrestling in Iowa or Penn State, that other team, I don't think there's any other team in wrestling that people love to beat more than the Hawkeyes. So if that 184 pounder's got an opportunity to show this freshman Hawkeye who's boss, that is another thing that I think Assad's going to run into a little bit more. It's like, okay, yeah, not today, kid. Okay, yeah, you're supposed to be in there and help these teams win national title. Guess what? I'm going to stop you from doing that. So. I guess, hindsight's always 20/20 in wrestling. I think we're going to see once we go into the Big Ten tournament, I'm really going to probably be a little bit more comfortable where I stand on the Abe Assad move, because again, he's still got the weigh-ins. It's a little different wrestling opens and 2 hour weigh-ins and, kind of doing free flowing a bit, but you're now part of that grind. You're part of that team. You're in the lineup, the 1 hour weigh-in. You've got, travel, you got the Friday, Sunday back to back with the Big Ten schedule. So I'm really curious on now his progression or regression, depending on how you look at it, in the Hawkeye lineup through the rest of the dual meet schedule going into the Big Ten tournament.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a couple interesting points. I think maybe the timing of when Brands pulled Assad's red shirt, I think is critical, right? And you touched upon that, especially as a freshman, to go through the grind from November with that singlet, with those colors on, because there's difference there, right? There's a different type of pressure entering an open tournament and just wrestling as a known person.
Well, what is the difference based on what did you do at Clarion? What did you do at Binghamton as a head coach with those? I mean, you've had good athletes that you're sitting there redshirting, so to build for the future. So what did you do with those type of athletes?
I think with those guys that I was on the fence on, it's like, okay, let's take that pressure away from putting our colors on, because there is a pressure to representing your institution. Let's take that pressure away. And number one, see how they perform in open competitions. And then I would let them progress. If they were getting results, I'm like, okay, let's bump this up. Let's get them, instead of, taking them out of an open tournament, getting them into a higher level tournament where they're guaranteed it's directing them into higher level competition. How are they going to perform consistently against higher level guys, ranked guys, back to back to back? And then once I saw that through the first half of the year, then I would typically make that decision in January. Okay, they've checked these two boxes. They're performing in open tournaments. They're performing against higher level competitions. Now is it time to put them in the singlet and see if they can take that final step? How are they going to perform in that singlet? And I think with Brands doing that in January, it does give you that opportunity where he's going to have to, one, balance the pressure and navigate the pressure of wearing the black and the gold for the Hawkeyes for the first time. Do it out in Carver-Hawkeye Arena, and then do it consistently against high-level Big Ten guys week after week after week. But I think it gives him the proper runway. He's got 2 good months of consistent high-level competition where he can perform and peak, but not push him over the edge of being run down, wearing the weight of this pressure, the weight cuts, all these things. So I think on that regard, I think the jury is still out. Let's see what he can do repeatedly over a course of time. The second part, the second thing that you mentioned was about Wilkie. He has been in the All-American round the last 2 years. So seemingly you're like, okay, he's been there a couple times. I think he should be able to kick the door down now. But there's certain times when you get where the All-American round starts to apply extra pressure in your head. When you've gotten there and you've been denied 2 straight years, it almost starts playing games in your head for certain guys a little bit. So maybe the thought from Brands and company was, hey, we've seen what Wilkie's had 2 opportunities to kick that door down. He hasn't done it. We think this young guy is going to be the guy to do it in Assad. Maybe that, and I'm just speculating there, Jason. You were asking for a window into some of my thoughts. That's kind of how I would view it moving forward. But I don't think, in my mind, this isn't the end of the discussion. Just because Assad's been pulled out of redshirt, just because he got put in there and got a good win, I don't think the story's over. I think there's still a discussion going on about 184 in Iowa.
Well, and to that point too, back to the preparation of when to redshirt, when to not, when to pull the redshirt. The dynamics change when you've got somebody they're battling for a spot. So you've got in Iowa, you got a 3-headed monster there. A lot of teams don't even have that type of that luxury to have 3 guys that they feel that they could be on the podium and challenge for a spot. But so back to the point about when you're pulling a guy out of red shirt and knowing that there's somebody that they're chasing, or somebody is looking maybe behind them to win a spot. How much does that play a role in your decision? Whether it's like, okay, is this just a guy where we're redshirting and getting him to compete, to check those boxes that you were talking about? Or does the dynamic change when that person is going to make your team better and he's got to knock another good guy out of the lineup?
I think that's where it gets delicate, right? I think that's where
delicate, good word.
That's where culture is really critical when you're making these decisions. The message you're sending to the team consistently about what we want to be as a team, what we want to be as individuals, what our expectations are going to be if you're out there in our lineup. If you're very clear, with your messaging to your team, I think it doesn't close the door from dissent or close the door to drama, but I think guys can understand. And I think it starts with the recruiting process. Like, look, hey, there's a lot of people that want to go to the Hawkeyes. How many people can actually perform in that environment? So I think just walking into that program, you got to put your big boy pants on. Like, hey, this is more of a business than most programs. I could, if I'm a high level guy and I'm recruiting and starting is my only goal, I could probably choose, 65 other programs or 60 other programs where I'm like, oh, I want to be the guy, I'm going to be there. With the traditional powers in the sport, you walk into that program understanding nothing is going to be given to you. And just because you're an All-American or a national champ, or you've been a 2-3 year starter, that doesn't guarantee you anything. And so I think that level of understanding that the members of these high-level teams they have a better understanding because it's been communicated. Not that it doesn't make it dicey or sticky, but I think when you're communicating and messaging on that level on a consistent basis, it takes away. It is more like a business. And I think it's less emotional for the guys. It's always going to be emotional, but it's less emotional when they understand, hey, there's priorities to being an Iowa Hawkeye athlete, being a varsity athlete. What is my responsibility when I strap that singlet on, when I put these colors on and I step out? I have to live up to these expectations. And if not, I mean, we've seen it from Penn State a lot over the last 5-6 years, making seemingly tough calls, but turned out to be good calls and the best calls for what they're trying to do as a team.
Do you think this rationale to pull aside is also looking at the landscape of 184? Because if you look at 184, no disrespect to the other athletes in the field, but it's Zahid and everybody else. The only other All-American is Taylor Vens, who was 2 years ago. And then you've got 7 freshmen or sophomores in the top 11. There is nobody outside of maybe Taylor Lujan who is as battle-tested in this weight class. So maybe it's an opportunity. Does he do this type of decision if this is 157 pounds or this is 165 pounds or 133, where it's much deeper of a weight? Whereas looking at the weight right now, you've got unproven talent across. Hunter Boland's number 2 in the country. You know, he's made one trip to the show. He redshirted. He's had a pretty good career thus far, but he's a sophomore, and he's expected to win now. But again, looking at Assad in there, and I'm okay, Aaron Brooks, Andrew Morgan from Campbell, Nino Bonacorsi. I mean, these are names like at the beginning of the year. Are you looking at these guys to place that high? Because they're unproven talent. So I'm curious on how much the weight class played a role. And it's like, okay, this weight is kind of open for the taking after Zahid, of course, any given day, blah, blah, blah. But how much does that play a role in pulling a red shirt at a weight class, that has one clear superstar? I mean, it almost reminds me of the year everybody was running from Askren at 74, that, the weight class cleared out. And, it's okay, well, who's going to chase Ben down? There were some quality opponents that ended up having really good careers after that, in hindsight. But again, how much does this play, the weight class? Because, I mean, I don't know if I'd ever see the day where a guy from Campbell was ranked 8th in the country. So, I mean, the landscape of college wrestling has changed. This weight class is crazy nuts to think about. So how much do you think that played a role?
I think that's an amazing point. In the sense, like everything I said about Wilkie previously, change the scenario, give me 133 from a year ago, the depth at 133, and we're like, holy heck, we've got 8 guys that could win this title, not just 8 potential placers. Like we got 8 guys potentially could win this thing. So if I have a seasoned guy like Wilkie, who's been in the All-American round twice, he's proven against legitimate competition that he's right in the mix, as opposed to like Assad. Like, okay, we know what the talent is. We see it we see it on the daily in the room. We see what he's doing every day, but Wilkie's done it, and at a pretty high level. Has he ever kicked the door down and made it to the podium? No, but we know what he's doing against these high-level guys. So there's not that level of uncertainty. There may not be a certainty on who the better guy is, but who the best guy for given the situation. So I think, like to your point at 84, where it is wide open, we have, outside of 2 guys, everybody else in the weight class is trying to do it for the first time. And there's a different element to that. Once you've kicked the door down, once you've gotten on the podium, once you have that knowledge base in your back pocket, it's easier to navigate the NCAA tournament. Now, I think on the surface, looking at the top 10 guys, we have a decent idea who's going to be in the mix to place, but these guys have never done it. So once they get in that environment, once they get, right, Friday morning, 10 a.m., right, or 11 a.m. at the NCAA tournament, when all the pressure, everything that you've dreamed about doing is on the line, you win this match, you're on the podium. How are they going to perform? We don't know, but there's a lot of other guys at that weight class where you don't know how they're gonna perform, but you're making their best guess. So I think, yes, given I think that's a huge point, JB, about the type of weight class. When you're looking at it as a coach and trying to make the best strategic decision, you have to evaluate all those things. So I think I think it could be different given a different weight class.
And of course, I think that factor played into why Penn State also pulled Aaron Brooks too. I mean, granted, they have a few. There's different scenarios at each school, but again, looking at Brooks, I think we could swap Brooks out with Assad in terms of who's going to be right there challenging Valencia. I mean, it's Hunter Bolin, and there's names again there. I think Lujan Wright might be the most dangerous guy at the weight class come March, because that's a guy he needs to be on that podium, and I think he feels it. But that's another discussion entirely. But again, we've got an unproven weight class beyond Zahid and Taylor Benz, if you want to go to that that freshman year that he had. So again, I think that was also a key role in why, because is he that much better to hit those guys and place 1-2 places higher?
Yeah, it should be interesting to see how the next couple months play out. I guess the one other match from the dual meet that we're talking about going all in and how deep you go. I think 141. I think there's rumors out there. There's talks out there. At 141 against Nebraska, Chad Red beats Max Murin. I think Red was ranked 9. Murin was ranked 6th. Red beats him. Not surprising, right? That's not a surprising result. But at this point, if you've made all these decisions, if you're Tom Brands and you've made all these decisions, the decision to go all in to win it, no matter what, do you go that next step and pull Ironman out of redshirt?
I don't know if Jaden Ironman was trolling us or not, because that is a scenario that I've tried to go through in my head a couple times. And again, using one weight class and comparing it to the other isn't the case. Like you said, it's delicate. So does the Brands crew decide to do the same thing at 41 they did at 84? I like looking at the weight class. I mean, going in, Max Murin was ranked 3rd, and Chad Red was 8th. Chad Red is also an interesting type of guy to look at. Are you setting the bar with Chad Red? Because he's a guy that is immensely talented. He's placed on the podium a couple times, but he's also had those seasons where he'll drop a match here and there, and you're like, wait, what? And I think he was a 16 seed off the top of my head last year, and ended up placing. So he's a guy that's had good seasons, but his regular season is always one where you're like, is that what you're measuring against? And Max Murin, I think that's the first time all year he had been taken down. I think I read that stat on a message board. He hadn't been taken down all year, and I'm sitting on my couch watching, and then boom, Red finishes the takedown. Well, that's the first time he's been taken down all year. And at number 3, I mean, he's beaten these good guys. I don't know if you gain that much more by pulling Ironman. Yeah, you might get a couple more bonus points, but at this point, matches, we know tournaments aren't wrestled on paper. And, Minnesota was expected to win a national title that year, and they finished 10th or something. All those guys coming back, the wheels can come off for any team. I mean, not just the bus wheels, getting you late to the show, but there is an opportunity. I don't know if is it an insurance policy? I mean, Jaden Ironman, that weight class, of course, he's probably one of the top 2. I think Nick Lee's wrestling really well right now. Pletcher's wrestling lights out. That's another topic entirely. But how much more points wise do you gain? Is it something like those intangibles? Is it a mentality now that we're not going to get beat because we have a team? We're going to take every opportunity to win a national title. We don't care about if it's an Olympic redshirt year. We're going to exploit the fact that the field may not be as deep around the country, but they're still going to go out there and do it. I don't know if I see why it's necessary, I guess is what I'm looking at, because I think Max Murin's capable of placing. And what's the difference between a title and a fit? Say if he was 3rd, that's not a significant amount of point differential. Granted, again, Ironman can get you some extra bonus points, but I don't know if that's enough of a point differential, because I think if you're looking at on paper, was it anywhere from 38 to 50 points, depending on which tournament rankings you look at? That's a large gap, and you've already got one guy you've replaced for it for hopefully 5 more points. I don't know. Is 10 more points that much at this point? When we get to Big Tens and there's injuries, I don't know. But right now, I just don't. My gut tells me no. It's just
that's what. And that's what's so interesting right now with this discussion of getting in the mind of Tom Brands and how he's balancing all these pieces, and how he's juggling all these balls that are in up in the air with him. Number one, he hasn't won in a decade. I mean, just thinking about that, the pressure that builds when there's only one standard for that place, right? So
it's not 4th.
Yes. So not meeting the standard for a decade how much are you willing to leave up for discussion? Like, and I guess my position has been pretty clear. Like at this point, if I haven't won in 10 years, I'm putting all 10 guys on the table. I'm pulling Ironman. I'm pulling Assad because, like you said, to your point, March is still a ways away. It's not that far, but it's still a ways away. They've been riding this wave of momentum. To your point, wheels can come off at any time. Injuries can come up. 1 or 2 injuries, that could be the tipping point. Right now, everybody, I think, is thinking they've got this big buffer, and there's big buffer between Penn State and Iowa. I don't think the gap is that. I don't think it's that great because I really think Brooks is going to keep developing. I think we've got a better Rashid. I don't think we've seen even close to the Rashid that's potentially there, but can he develop through his knee injury? We don't know that. But I guess back to Iowa, like how much of an insurance policy do you actually want when you haven't won in a decade? I would want to win by 200 points if I could and sacrifice the next 2 years or have to fight and make better decisions in the next 2 years. I would rather get this one no matter what. No matter what. If I can get this one right now, I'm getting it any way, shape, or form. So I would pull Ironman. Is it probably knee jerk? Is it too much? Yes, I think. But if I haven't won in 10 years and I'm feeling those conversations and the conversations that are going on in Carver-Hawkeye, as much as they love the Hawkeyes, they want to win, man. So let's win.
Is this, here's another thing that just popped in mind. Is this maybe some psychological warfare to put that out there to light the fire under Max Buren and be like, hey, you better perform or else this guy's right here. You know how good he is. So I don't know. Is it psychological warfare to throw it out there and know that he really is looking over his shoulder now?
Yeah. But I think that's why you go to an IR program. You want to be under that pressure. And if you can withstand that pressure, if you can rise above that pressure, you're going to have the success that you want. And so I think these are the pressures and the added pressures that are positive things to the higher level programs. They can create these pressures within the program that you can't get at a Binghamton, you can't get at a Clarion, that you're hoping your athletes can get these experiences in competition. The benefit and the beauty of the Iowas, the Ohio States, the Okie States, they can replicate that pressure. They don't even have to replicate it. It's a real pressure you're dealing with every single day.
One thing to also bring up in terms of the Iowa thing, and I'm not trying to put anything out there like there's any speculation about the status of Mr. Brands' position, but Jimmy Zaleski won a national title, the last national title before Tom Brands took over in 2000. 7 years went in between before they made a coaching change, and then Tom Brands won a title in 2008, 9, and 10. There was 7-year gap between titles. This has been a 9-year gap going on 10. Is there anything to look at comparatively speaking? You're like, okay, first is the bar there at Iowa. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, and
I don't want to say is it a job security thing, but is it? I mean, what would you think as an AD?
I mean,
I got a lot of Iowa fans going to be hating me right now after that statement.
I've always said, like, who you really going to get to replace Tom Brands?
Absolutely.
But
I mean, he is the image of what it means to be a Hawkeye.
No. Is John Smith going to leave Ohio State? No. Is Tom Ryan? I think Iowa fans would want to get their hopes up like, oh, he wrestled for the Hawkeyes. No, I don't think he's leaving Ohio. So who do you get?
Yeah, I think this might be something we need to table because it could be just a pop in my head about, just looking at the stats going, well, what happened with Jimmy? I don't think that's going to happen with Tom by any stretch of the imagination. It's
JB,
just it's an interesting stat to look at. I mean,
we're acting like Tom Brands doesn't feel any pressure. He's got to, because
that guy loves to win. I think the pressure is more self-inflicted than it is than it would be from the administration by in that regard.
Yeah, but he's got to be feeling. We're all human here. We listen to what people say, no matter how confident we are with ourselves and our program. But it as well as myself. If you look at the results Jim Zaleski had and Tom Brands had, they're almost identical. And Jim Zaleski
3 titles in a drought.
Yeah, 3 titles in a drought. Tom Brand's 3 titles in a drought. So, do I think Tom Brand's that should even be a part of the discussion? No, not at all. Not at all.
I agree.
But
just
is there something in his head, like the old monkey off your back, when you haven't won for so long, and that's the Tiger Woods discussion, right? And how amazing his Masters championship was a year ago, because it was a decade, kind of the same timeline in between.
Well, it's like when the Yankees were so bad in the 80s, they came back and started winning titles again. It was like, like you say, dynasties, and, people are going to eventually hate, people hate winners in terms of wanting to see them get beat when they win so much. It's like, like what people love to see Penn State guys get beat at nationals outside of those folks in State College. The same thing's been like that for the Hawkeyes. When a Hawkeye loses at nationals and when they were on top, the place erupted. I mean, it wasn't just Cyclone fans. It wasn't just fans for the Big Ten. So it's one of those things. But when a team like Iowa, when a baseball team like the New York Yankees, when the Dallas Cowboys came back, teams you love to hate as sports fans, when they're back on top, I think it makes the sport more interesting too. You've got it draws more eyeballs, it gets more media coverage, especially in an area like Iowa, which has the absolute bar none best newspaper coverage of any state for high school and college wrestling combined. So when the Hawks are making a run, it is a lot. Those gears of college wrestling seem to be churning a lot faster, in my opinion.
No, without a doubt. I think, the more success, and I think we see it across the board, like there's so much parity in the sport. That's a great thing. I love it. I love to see it. It's a beautiful thing for our sport. But JB, it looks like we're running up on an hour. So the one consistent thing we always do here on the show is go overtime. I think we went overtime for this first show. I think it's been a lot of fun. I think we've got a lot of stuff we can jump into tomorrow or the following day, the next time we jump on the show. But I think this is a great, maybe hopefully a precursor of what's to come with the show. Like, I think this is the type of discussion that I think you can expect from us, that it's not going to be just box score centric or result centric. I think, if you want to talk about layers, if you want to hear about context, if you want to hear philosophy, legislation, I think this is kind of the vein of what the show is going to be. There are going to be informed discussions about what's going out there immediately, current events. But I think, what we're trying to achieve here is talk at different levels and inform different perspectives, because I think that's the beauty of it. It's not as simple. It's never a black and white thing. There's always layers. There's always nuance to it. And I think that's really the beauty of the discussion.
Yeah, a couple things that I do want to get to is the when next episode we'll go a little bit more deeper in on the not the ducking but the results of the duck. What's the situation when you go to matches where we've got a roster of 25, 30 guys and you're forfeiting weights. Those are things I wanted to get to the forfeit discussion, because that is detrimental to the sport in so many different aspects. So that's one thing I want to touch on the next episode, and of course we've got rankings to talk about by the time we get them out. Every outlet will have them out, and we can look at the shifts of what happened over the weekend.
Cool. Well, hey, Jason, it was a lot of fun. Thanks for jumping on the show. Look forward to having another discussion, and have a great day.